Indeed, I didn't want to say that, Bob, but I'll do my best. So today, January 15th, is Dr. King's birthday. I know we often celebrate this whole weekend as Dr. King's birthday, but it is truly today, January 15th. And if he was still alive today, he would be 88 years old. Have you ever thought about that? That Dr. King would be 88 years old today? It's still a fairly young man, full of life and vigor. And have you ever given any thought with what he might have done with his life if it had not been cut short by that assassin's bullet? He was only 38 years old when he died, though when they did the autopsy on the body, he had a heart of nearly a 70-year-old man. The work had done that much to tear at his insides. But what would he have done with his life if he had been able to continue on into his 70s and 80s? Would he have been the one who gave the inaugural invocation at President Obama's first inaugural in 2008? Would he have become Senator King, Ambassador King, President King? Or would he have just retired and decided that he was going to take a teaching position at a prestigious New England liberal arts school? Or maybe he just wanted to go back to being the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, and just preach sermons to his congregation and lead Bible study and perform weddings and baptisms and preside over funerals. How many vacations would he and Coretta have gone on? What would have been his favorite place? Hawaii? Costa Rica? Aspen? How proud would he have been to preside and officiate his son's wedding, or to walk his daughter down the aisle? I have to admit that the deaths of our beloved members this week has gotten me thinking a lot about mortality and about my own life. And if you don't remember anything else that I say today, take this with you. Don't wait. If you have something that you want to say to someone, say it. If you love someone, show it. If there's something that you want to do, by God, make the time to do it. So Ralph Abernathy, in the first clip that we saw this morning, he's the guy standing over Dr. King's shoulder laughing at him. That's how good of a friend he was. That even in this amazing moment in the middle of the civil rights movement on the steps of the Birmingham Capitol, in this seminal moment in American history, his best friend is giving Dr. King a hard time. Because he had heard that speech so many times before that he couldn't believe that Dr. King was using it again. And he just couldn't keep the laughter away. But if you ever visit the King Center in Atlanta, anyone? A few of you. If you ever visit the King Center in Atlanta, Ralph Abernathy, who is a minister and a PhD himself, gives this introductory video about Dr. King's life. And in it, it's about an 8-minute video. Ralph Abernathy says that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's story is a story for the ages. And yet, it really is just a life of a single individual that can show us and teach us what seems like is an ordinary, everyday life on the surface: a father, a husband, a good man with an excellent sense of humor, a clergyman, a scholar, turns out to be this extraordinary life that tears at us and uplifts us and inspires us. And Abernathy goes on to talk about in this video that our brother Martin, in a way that so many of us here in the 21st century in Western American society, where faith and the intentional aspect of faith being so important to someone's life has become less and less impactful, that as an intentional person of faith, this, his Christian faith was according to Ralph Abernathy, the defining characteristic of Dr. King. It wasn't his civil rights movement, it wasn't his leadership in SNCC, it wasn't his training of young people, it wasn't all the wonderful political action that he did, it was his faith that was the defining characteristic of Dr. King, according to the man who was his best friend. Abernathy says in that video, Martin, as he called him, was raised and reared in the Black Baptist Church. We forget that. But the man was a devout Christian. He was moved by the faith of Abraham and Sarah. He was moved by the courage and trust of Moses. He read the prophets and was challenged by Nathan and Amos. He took lessons on fortitude and steadfastness from Mother Mary. He read the letters of Paul and he inserted himself into the story, and he could see himself as the audience to which Paul was writing. And always, according to Dr. Abernathy, always at the heart and in Martin's mind was the life and teachings and healings and miracles and examples and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It was the Christ story which meant more to Martin than any other story that he knew. And it grounded him in hope and an abiding, unyielding, unwielding hope that God was not this distant, far-off, impersonal thing, but that God was an actor in the world and in history, and that if we took on the principles of Christ in our individual life and as a society, if we truly were grounded in the principles that Christ taught us and not in the fears and prejudices and greed of others, but truly in the example of Christ, America could actually claim for the first time ever an authentic way that we were a Christian nation. Because up to that point, according to Dr. King, we have been lying to ourselves anytime we have told ourselves that. And it was Christ that shaped Martin's life. And so as we celebrate Dr. King's legacy, and we are inspired by his teachings and his rousing oratory and his prophetic example and his political movement and the social rights era, he is pointing us to Christ, who in turn points us to God. You hear it in the speech on the steps of the Birmingham Capitol. His deep belief and faith in God through Jesus Christ. And Abernathy says that Dr. King had 3 favorite books: the biography of Gandhi, Plato's Republic, and the Bible. And Dr. King's Bible was so threadbare that it shocked Abernathy every time that he pulled it out, that it didn't fly apart into a million pages, because it was barely holding together by a thread. He read it so much. And he prayed constantly, and he used the lexicon of the church and the faith in his public addresses. Every speech was a sermon, and every sermon was grounded in God and Christ and the Black church experience which raised Brother Martin. On February 4th, 1968, Dr. King ascended to the pulpit at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and he preached his last sermon. And it was called The Drum Major's Instinct. And it was based on a verse in Mark that says, "Whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant." And he told the congregation in that sermon that he would like people to say at his funeral, "I'd like for someone to say," Dr. King said, that on that day, Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. That's what he wanted his legacy to be, that he tried to love somebody. And excerpts of that sermon were played on the nationally televised funeral service of Dr. King on April 9th, 1968, only 2 months later. See, King's sermon told the story of James and John, who asked Jesus if they could have the most prominent seat in heaven. And at the core of that sermon was their desire was a drum major instinct, according to Dr. King, a desire to be out front, to lead the parade. And King warned his congregation that this desire for importance can lead to a snobbish set of exclusive values and tragic race prejudice. Do you know that a lot of our race problems in the United States, according to Dr. King in this sermon, grows out of a drum major's instinct, a need that some people have to feel superior over others and to feel that their white skin ordained them to be first and best. Conversely, King preached that when Jesus responded to the request of James and John, that he did not rebuke their ambition, but he taught them that greatness comes from humble servitude. As King puts it, Jesus reordered their priorities. We've been talking a little bit about that at the noon Bible study. That Jesus reordered their priorities and told his disciples to keep feeling the need to be first, but what you want to do is to be first in love. And King used Jesus' own life as an example of how the priority of love could provide greatness. And in the biographical sketch of Jesus, King preached that Jesus owned nothing, and when public opinion turned against him, he was called a rabble-rouser. And when his principles led to political change, he was called a troublemaker for practicing civil disobedience that his faith called him to practice. And then finally, King notes that although by worldly standards, Jesus was a failure, that no one else has affected the life of humanity on this earth as such that one solitary, ordinary man living out an extraordinary life. And then in the middle of the sermon of the drum major's instinct, Brother Martin turned to his congregation and he implored them to know that anyone, regardless of race or age or gender or where they come from or how much money they have in their bank account, that all people were called to serve. He says, and I quote, "If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant." And that is the new definition of greatness. And this morning, the thing that I like about it, that by giving this definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. And you don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics and physics to serve. Amen? Amen. Thank God you don't have to know that. You only need a heart full of grace, Dr. King said, a soul generated by love, and you can be that servant. We've got some difficult days ahead. We've got big issues that affect real people that need our attention. There is a great deal of fear of the unknown as we tread into early 2017. But we lean on a faith that teaches us that God is doing a new thing, making a way out of no way, that in the eyes of God, everybody is somebody because no one is nobody. So let's be driven by this drum major instinct, driven by the percussive drumbeat of the heart of Christ. At the very end of his last sermon that he gave in his life in the pulpit of Ebenezer Baptist Church, in the church that raised and reared him, Brother Martin, father, husband, pastor, friend, implored his congregation to remember his attempts to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, comfort the prisoner. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, Dr. King preached, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. Say that I was a drum major for righteousness, and all those awards I won and recognitions I was given are shallow things that will not matter. I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that's all I want to say. If I can help someone as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my life will not be in vain. If I can do my Christian duty, and if I can bring salvation to a world once rot, if I can spread the message as Christ taught, then my living will not be in vain. Yes, Jesus, I want to be on your right side or your left side, not for any selfish reason. I want to be on your right side or your left side, not in terms of some political kingdom or ambition, but I just want to be there in love and in justice and in truth and in commitment of others so that we can make of this old world something new. We've got a difficult time ahead, but I know that we'll make it to the promised land if we'll just be driven by the drumbeat of the heart of Christ. We can all lead because we can all serve. I know that because Dr. King told me that. And Dr. King knows that because Christ told him that. Amen? Amen. And amen.